was sitting on the cold tile floor outside the emergency room, the hospital bill folded in my trembling hands, when my father texted me a photo of my sister's wedding cake. 5 tiers of white fondant decorated with edible gold leaf, topped with sugar flowers that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His caption read, "Worth every cent." I stared at that photo until the screen blurred, my vision swimming with tears I refused to let fall. Above me, literally above me in our family home that sat on the hill overlooking the hospital, crystal chandeliers illuminated rooms full of wedding planners and florists. My sister Lucia's custom gown hung in the master bedroom, a creation of silk and lace that had required 3 fittings in Paris. The surgery I needed to survive would cost $25,000. My parents had already spent $500,000 on a single day that would end with champagne toasts and a honeymoon in Bali. My name is Myria Solano, and this is the moment they chose a satin aisle over my heartbeat. The bill in my hands detailed a procedure that would remove the tumor pressing against my spine, a mass that had been growing for months while everyone focused on save-the-date cards and seating charts. Without the surgery, the doctor had been clear. I had maybe 6 months. With it, I had a future. The morning after I received the hospital estimate, I found my mother in the sunroom wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was reviewing fabric swatches for the ceremony chairs, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Behind her, morning light filtered through imported curtains, making everything look soft and golden. I stood in the doorway holding the folded hospital bill like a life raft, trying to find the words that would make her understand. "Mom," I said, my voice smaller than I intended, "I need to talk to you about the surgery." She glanced up briefly, then returned to her swatches. "Not right now, Myria. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something? This is important," the doctor said. "Everything is allocated for the big day," she interrupted, setting down a sample of champagne-colored silk. "We've already committed to vendors, sent deposits. This isn't the right time." The casualness of her dismissal felt like a physical blow. I tried again, my hands shaking as I unfolded the bill. "Mom, please, I need $25,000 without this surgery." "Don't be dramatic," she said, finally looking at me directly. Her eyes held no warmth, only irritation. "We have to prioritize what benefits the whole family. Lucia's wedding is an investment in all our futures." An investment. My life was a drama. Their priority was clear. That afternoon, I found my father in his study polishing a pair of gold cufflinks. They were custom-made for the wedding, engraved with my sister's new initials intertwined in an elaborate script. He held them up to the light, admiring the way they caught the sun, completely absorbed in their shine. "Dad," I said from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "I really need to talk to you about the surgery." "Your mother told me about your little tantrum this morning," he replied, still focused on those cufflinks. "I need you to understand something, Myria. This wedding is important for our family's reputation, for our business connections. We've invited some of the most influential people in the state. I'm not trying to ruin anything, I just need—" "Don't overshadow the weekend with dramatics," he said, finally turning to face me. His expression was stern, disappointed. "We've worked too hard on this to have you making everything about yourself." Making everything about myself. I was dying, and asking for help to live was selfish. I excused myself before he could see me cry and locked myself in the pantry, pressing a dish towel to my mouth to muffle the sobs. The towel smelled like lemons and lavender, like the life I'd thought I had. Like a home where people cared whether you lived or died. When the crying stopped, I wiped my face and made a decision. I would stop asking them for help. I would find another way. The temp agency office smelled like coffee and photocopier ink. I filled out the application forms with shaky hands, lying on every health question. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Patricia, barely glanced at the IV bruises on my arms. "Data entry experience?" she asked, scrolling through my sparse resume. "I'm a fast learner," I said, "and I need work immediately." She studied me for a moment, and I saw something like pity flicker across her face. "There's a firm downtown that needs someone to alphabetize and digitize old invoices. It's boring work, minimum wage. You interested?" "Yes," I said, probably too quickly. "When can I start?" "Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp." I thanked her and walked out into the sunshine, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Not hope exactly, but determination. That evening, I opened a new savings account online. When it asked for an account nickname, I typed a single letter, M for Myria. For mine. For the life I was going to save myself since no one else would. My first paycheck would be small, probably laughably small compared to what my parents spent daily on wedding preparations. But it would be money I earned. Money no one could take away or refuse to give. I started that Monday, sitting in a dusty back office filing invoices from 1997, and it felt like the first honest work I'd ever done. 2 weeks into my temp job, my mother asked me to help organize the wedding paperwork that had taken over the dining room. Contracts, receipts, vendor agreements, all of it spread across the table in carefully labeled folders. I agreed, partly because I needed to maintain the appearance of family cooperation, partly because I was curious about exactly how much they were spending. While sorting through venue contracts and catering quotes, I found an envelope stuffed with canceled checks. They were made out to vendors I'd never heard of, amounts that seemed random until I started adding them up. One check for $12,500 to a company called Prestige Event Solutions. Another for $8,000 to Luxury Wedding Imports. A third for $15,000 to something called Elite Celebration Consultants. I pulled up the hospital bill on my phone and compared the numbers. The surgery cost exactly $25,000. These 3 checks alone totaled $35,500. They had the money. They'd always had the money. They just chose to spend it on companies that made a party look expensive instead of spending it to keep their daughter alive. I waited until my mother left the room, then quickly photographed every check in that envelope. My hands shook as I took the pictures, terrified she'd walk back in and catch me. But she was too busy on the phone with the florist, debating the merits of peonies versus garden roses. The free legal clinic operated out of a converted storefront between a laundromat and a bodega. I'd found it through a social worker at the hospital, someone who'd noticed I always came to appointments alone. The attorney who met with me was a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Cruz, probably in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. I showed her everything. The hospital bills, the wedding budget I'd pieced together, the photos of those canceled checks. She studied each document carefully, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I just feel like I'm watching a crime happen and no one else sees it but me." "What you're describing isn't technically illegal," Victoria said slowly. "Parents can spend their money however they choose, but there are patterns here that concern me. Some of these vendors, these company names, I don't recognize them. And I know every legitimate event company in this city." She leaned forward. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to email me every financial photo you have, every receipt, every check, every bank statement you can access. Don't accuse anyone of anything. Don't confront them. We observe, we collect, and we wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to bury themselves," she said simply. "In my experience, people who operate like this always do." I was walking home from another chemotherapy session when my phone rang. My mother's voice was bright with excitement. "Myria, you won't believe what we just did. The designer agreed to add special embroidery to Lucia's train. Hand-stitched by Italian artisans, it's going to be absolutely stunning." "That's nice," I managed, my voice flat. "How much did that cost?" "Oh, I don't remember exactly. 12,000, maybe 13. But it's worth it. This dress will be featured in magazines for years." $13,000 for embroidery. On a dress my sister would wear for maybe 6 hours. That was more than half the cost of my surgery. I stopped walking and leaned against a streetlight, closing my eyes against a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the chemo. "Are you there?" my mother asked. "I'm here." "Well, I have to go. The cake baker is on the other line. We're discussing the filling options. I'll talk to you later, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The endearment felt like mockery. I walked the rest of the way home slowly, counting streetlights to keep myself from crying in public. 1, 2, 3, 4. Small lights in the darkness, like the small amounts of money I was saving. Like the small hope I was trying to keep alive. When I got home, I added dress embroidery, $13,000, to my growing spreadsheet of wedding expenses. The total was approaching $470,000, and they weren't done yet. At a family wine tasting event for the wedding, my sister hugged me tightly. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my car, her engagement ring catching the light with every movement. When she pulled back, her eyes flickered to the IV bruises on my arm. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been guilt cross her face. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice softening. "Managing," I said. The treatments are rough, but you'll be fine, Myria, she interrupted, squeezing my shoulder. You always are. You're the strong one, remember? The strong one. The independent one. The one who didn't need help because that made it easier for them to not offer any. I wondered if that's what they told themselves at night to justify the wedding spending while I struggled to pay for parking at the cancer center. Maybe they'd convinced themselves I was strong enough to survive without help, special enough to be their investment. Later, I stood by the window watching guests sample wines that cost more per bottle than I made in a day at my temp job. A waiter offered me a glass of something expensive and French. I took it and didn't drink it, just held it, feeling the cool glass against my palm, feeling like a ghost at my own family's celebration. When the event ended, my father cornered me by the door. You've been quiet tonight. Everything okay? Just tired. Well, try to be more present at the actual wedding. We need everyone looking happy in the photos. The florist thought I was part of the budgeting team. He approached me at the venue while I was waiting for Lucia, his tablet in hand and his expression friendly. Hey, you're with the Solano family, right? He asked. I nodded, not correcting his assumption. Great. I just wanted to confirm that the extra envelope was received and recorded. Your parents were very generous, and I wanted to make sure everything was documented properly. Extra envelope, I repeated carefully. Yeah, the cash payment under the table for the expedited shipping on the imported orchids. He pulled up a photo on his tablet, showing a manila envelope stuffed with $100 bills. I always photograph these transactions for my records. You can never be too careful with cash, right? Can you send me that photo? I asked, keeping my voice steady. For our records. Sure, no problem. What's your email? I gave him my personal email address, and within minutes the photo appeared in my inbox. Another puzzle piece. Another example of money moving through channels that wouldn't show up on official wedding budgets or tax returns. When Lucia finally appeared, she was in a good mood, chatting about honeymoon plans and thank you card designs. She had no idea I'd just documented another piece of evidence that our parents were operating in ways that might not be entirely legal. I saved the photo to an encrypted folder I'd created specifically for this purpose. The folder was growing larger every week. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor with receipts and bank statements spread around me like autumn leaves. I'd been collecting evidence for 2 months now, and the pattern was undeniable. My parents had created a web of payments that looked legitimate on the surface, but fell apart under scrutiny. There were multiple accounts with only Lucia's initials, transfers between business accounts and personal accounts that coincidentally matched wedding vendor costs. Checks to companies that didn't seem to exist when I searched for them online. And through it all, a consistent story. They had plenty of money for a party, none for saving their daughter's life. I made a timeline, matching dates and amounts. On March 15th, they'd paid $18,000 for imported champagne, while I'd been denied a $200 request to help cover my medication copays. On April 3rd, they'd spent $25,000 on custom furniture rentals, while I'd taken on a second temp job to afford my next round of treatments. On May 12th, they'd written a $30,000 check for wedding photography while I'd sold my laptop to make rent. The evidence was damning, but it was also heartbreaking. This wasn't just about money. It was about priority, about value, about who mattered enough to save. I photographed everything and emailed it to Victoria, then carefully returned all the documents to their original positions. No one could know I was building a case against them. Not yet. Sunday brunch at Aunt Rosa's house was usually an exercise in polite conversation and excellent food. But this Sunday, Rosa had too much wine, and the truth came spilling out. We were clearing dessert plates when she put her hand on my arm and said, a bit too loudly, "You know, your parents always said Lucia was the investment and you were the independent one. That's why they treated you two so differently." She laughed like she'd made a joke, but I felt something inside me freeze solid. "They said that?" I asked quietly. "Oh, sweetie, don't take it the wrong way. They just meant Lucia needed more help getting established. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. They knew you'd be fine on your own." She patted my arm and wandered away to refill her wine glass, leaving me standing there with a stack of plates and the confirmation of what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. After she left, I went to my parents' home office. They were both at the venue dealing with some crisis involving the dance floor installation, so I had the house to myself. I searched through filing cabinets until I found what I was looking for: loan documents. 3 different loans, all taken out in my name, none with my signature or permission. The money from those loans had been transferred into accounts I'd never seen before. Accounts that, when I cross-referenced them with my growing spreadsheet, matched the accounts with Lucia's initials. I reached out to a local journalist named Alex Torres who'd written several pieces exposing financial scandals. We met at a coffee shop far from my neighborhood, somewhere I wouldn't accidentally run into family friends. Alex listened as I explained the situation in hypothetical terms. "Let's say there's a family," I said. "They're spending lavishly on public events, but there are signs the money isn't all legitimate. Shell companies, under-the-table payments, loans taken out in someone else's name without permission." Alex made notes on his phone. "And you have documentation." "Hypothetically, yes. Photos, bank statements, receipts, vendor testimonies." "Here's the thing about financial crimes," Alex said. "They always involve other people. Vendors, banks, loan officers, those people keep records. And when those records start surfacing through official channels, the whole house of cards collapses." He leaned back in his chair. "If someone were to, hypothetically, provide this documentation to the right authorities, it would trigger investigations, audits, the kind of scrutiny that makes wealthy people very uncomfortable." "Would it stop a wedding?" I asked. Alex smiled. "It would stop a lot more than that." We talked for another hour about timing, about how to protect myself legally, about what would happen once the information became public. When I left that coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: power. Not much, but enough. Enough to keep going, enough to see this through. While visiting Lucia's new home, a wedding gift from our parents valued at around $800,000, I found a folder labeled Honeymoon Suite sitting on her kitchen counter. Inside were receipts and confirmation emails for a villa rental in Bali. 2 weeks, private beach, personal chef, couples spa treatments. The total cost, $15,000. I remembered the date on these receipts. It was the same week my father had told me, with great regret in his voice, that they couldn't stretch the budget any further to help with my medical expenses. They couldn't stretch $15,000 for me to live, but could easily spare it for my sister to vacation. I photographed every page in that folder, my hands shaking with anger I couldn't afford to show. Lucia came into the kitchen while I was finishing, and I quickly closed the folder. "Finding everything okay?" she asked, pouring herself a glass of expensive wine. "Just admiring your place, it's beautiful." "Thanks, Mom and Dad have been so generous. I keep telling them they're spoiling me, but they insist." She laughed, that carefree sound of someone who'd never had to worry about anything. "I'm really lucky." Lucky. Yes, that's exactly what she was. Lucky to be born the favorite, the investment, the one worth saving. I left her house feeling hollow. That night, I added the honeymoon receipts to my evidence folder. The total wedding cost had now crossed $500,000. $500,000 for a single day, while I scraped together dollars for the surgery that would save my life. My accountant friend from college, named Xavier, agreed to meet me for coffee. I'd been careful not to tell anyone in my family that I was still in touch with him. He worked for a firm that specialized in forensic accounting, the kind of work that involved untangling financial crimes. I showed him everything. The patterns I'd documented, the shell companies, the mysterious transfers, the loans taken in my name. Xavier spent an hour reviewing the documents on his laptop, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Myria," he finally said, "this isn't just family drama, this is fraud, possibly embezzlement, definitely tax evasion. How bad is it? If this hits the wrong person's desk at the IRS or the state attorney general's office, your parents are looking at serious legal consequences. Fines, possible jail time, asset seizure." He zoomed in on one particular transfer. "See this. This is money moving from a registered business charity fund into a personal account. That's illegal, period. And this amount here, it matches exactly with that imported flour shipment you told me about." "What should I do?" Xavier closed his laptop. "Honestly, you should decide how far you want to take this, because once these dominoes start falling, they don't stop. Your parents' business could collapse. Your sister's wedding could be canceled. Your whole family's reputation could be destroyed." He looked at me carefully. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought about sitting on that cold hospital floor, about the bill I still carried in my purse like a talisman, About being called dramatic and told to not overshadow the weekend. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. I collapsed during a chemotherapy session at the low-cost clinic I'd been using. One moment I was sitting in the chair watching the IV drip. The next moment everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with a nurse checking my vitals. You fainted, she explained. Your blood pressure dropped. We're going to keep you for a few hours for observation. I asked for my phone. 33 missed messages in the family group chat, all sent during the 2 hours I'd been unconscious. The ice sculpture arrived. It's even more beautiful than the photos. Photographer wants to schedule the final pre-wedding consultation. Mom, which shoes are you wearing? I need to coordinate. Dad, did you confirm the vintage car rental? The monogrammed napkins are perfect. 33 messages about party details. Not one person had noticed I'd been gone. Not one person had asked where I was or if I was okay. The nurse saw me staring at my phone, saw the tears running down my face. Family, she asked gently. Something like that, I whispered. She squeezed my hand. Honey, family is who shows up when you need them, not who shares your DNA. After they released me, I went straight to Victoria's office. I'm ready, I told her. Whatever we need to do, I'm ready. I'm done protecting people who wouldn't cross the street to save me. The Whisper network in our small city worked faster than I'd anticipated. People talked and word spread quickly when questions started being asked. A neighbor stopped me at the mailbox one morning. Myria, dear, I heard something concerning. Is it true your parents are having financial difficulties? Someone mentioned they might be redirecting funds. I gave her a carefully neutral answer. I really couldn't say. You'd have to ask them. But the question told me everything I needed to know. The investigation Victoria had quietly initiated was beginning to ripple outward. That same week, a wedding vendor called Lucia's phone while we were having lunch. I could hear the concern in the vendor's voice even from across the table. I'm calling to confirm payment arrangements. There's been some confusion, and I need to verify the funds will be available. Lucia's face went pale. What do you mean confusion? My parents paid your deposit months ago. Yes, but there are questions about the source of those funds. My business manager is requesting additional verification before we proceed. After she hung up, Lucia stared at her phone like it had betrayed her. That was weird, she said. Why would they suddenly care about payment verification? Maybe they're just being careful, I suggested. But I knew exactly why. Victoria's public record requests were creating uncertainty. Vendors who'd accepted under-the-table payments were getting nervous. The foundation was starting to crack, and my sister was finally beginning to notice. Victoria called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice controlled but urgent. We got something. A clerk at the county office accidentally forwarded us a document that shouldn't have been public yet. It shows a large transfer from your father's business charity fund into a personal account. The amount is $28,000, and it matches perfectly with that imported flower shipment you documented. What does this mean? It means they've crossed from questionable ethics into actual criminal territory. Charity funds are heavily regulated. Using them for personal expenses, even indirectly, is a federal crime. She paused. I've forwarded this to a friend at the state attorney general's office. They're opening an investigation. My hands shook as I held the phone. How long until? Until something happens, hard to say. These things can take months, but the wedding is in 6 weeks, right? 5 weeks, actually. Then things are going to start moving fast. Investigations like this have a way of accelerating when there's a deadline. People get nervous, they make mistakes, they start talking to protect themselves. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small bed in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what I'd set in motion. There was no going back now. The truth was coming, whether my family was ready for it or not. And somewhere in the darkness, I felt the smallest, fiercest ember of satisfaction. They'd taught me I didn't matter. Now they were going to learn the cost of that lesson. My sister cornered me at the wedding venue during a final rehearsal. The space was transformed into something from a fairy tale, all white flowers and golden light. Hundreds of thousands of dollars made visible in silk and crystal. Lucia grabbed my arm and pulled me into a side room, her face tight with stress. Are you doing something? She asked, her voice sharp. What? Vendors keep calling Xavier's family instead of Mom and Dad. They're asking for payment verification for tax documents for proof of fund sources. This didn't start happening until a few weeks ago. She stepped closer. Did you say something to someone? I met her eyes steadily. I don't know what you're talking about. Myria, I'm not stupid. Things started falling apart right around the time you stopped coming to family dinners, right around the time you started acting weird. I'm not acting weird, I'm sick. Remember. The thing you said I'd be fine about because I'm the strong one, she flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me, Lucia, how much did Mom and Dad spend on this wedding? That's none of your business. How much? I don't know exactly, maybe 400,000, 450. Try 500,000, I said. And do you know how much my surgery costs, the one that will save my life? She didn't answer. $25,000, that's it. 5% of what they spent on your party. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know it was that serious. Mom said you were being dramatic. I'm dying. That's not dramatic, that's factual. I walked past her toward the door. Enjoy your rehearsal. The next morning, Lucia's future father-in-law requested a meeting with my parents. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from Aunt Rosa, who'd heard about it from a family friend who'd heard about it from someone at the country club. Apparently, the groom's father, a man named Fitzgerald who owned several successful businesses, had asked for transparent accounting before his family signed the final venue contracts. He wanted to see proof that my parents could actually afford the wedding they'd promised. That the money was legitimate and legally sourced. My mother panicked. According to Rosa, she'd called 6 different relatives asking for emergency loans, claiming there'd been a misunderstanding with the bank. My father spent the entire day packing his office, making phone calls to lawyers and accountants. The wedding that had seemed so certain, so inevitable, was suddenly teetering on the edge of cancellation, and the dominoes were only beginning to fall. That evening, my father showed up at my apartment. I'd never given him the address, which meant he'd somehow tracked me down through property records or family connections. I opened the door to find him standing there, his face gray and tired in a way I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "About what you're doing, about the questions being asked, about the investigation." So he knew. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Myria. I know you've been talking to people, showing them documents, making accusations. I haven't accused anyone of anything. I just answered questions honestly." His face hardened. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you chose a party over my life." I closed the door in his face. The bank manager called Victoria directly. He'd found irregularities in multiple accounts tied to my father's business, patterns that suggested money laundering and tax evasion. The manager, a man named Hugo Castellanos, had apparently been watching these accounts for months, but it was only after Victoria's public record requests started circulating that he felt safe to come forward. "Your father tried to intimidate me," Hugo told Victoria during a conference call that I was allowed to listen in on. "He implied he had connections that could make my life difficult, but I've been documenting everything, and I'm not going to jail to protect someone else's fraud." Hugo began an internal review that wouldn't stay private for long. Banks were required to report suspicious activity to federal authorities. Once that report was filed, the investigation would expand beyond the state level. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Before this becomes public," Victoria estimated maybe 2 weeks. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks from today. The timing was going to be very close. That night, I allowed myself to imagine what would happen next. The wedding canceled. My parents facing legal consequences. My sister realizing her perfect life was built on foundations of sand and fraud. And me finally getting the surgery I needed, saving myself with money I'd earned and grants I'd applied for, and community support I'd once been too proud to accept. Justice wouldn't taste sweet, but it would taste real. And after months of swallowing lies and dismissals, real was enough. The wedding planner called my parents in a panic. She'd received notice from the venue that they were suspending final approval pending financial clarification. Without venue approval, there could be no wedding. At least not at this particular palace-like estate that cost $75,000 to rent for a day. My mother went into full crisis mode, calling everyone she knew who might have influence with the venue owners. My father tried his usual tactic of throwing money at the problem, offering to pay an additional deposit. But the venue's lawyers had been contacted by investigators, and they weren't willing to risk their reputation by hosting an event funded by potentially illegal money. "It's just a clerical issue," my mother told everyone who asked. "A misunderstanding with the bank. Everything will be sorted out in a few days." But it wasn't a clerical issue, and everyone was starting to know it. Vendors began canceling quietly, afraid of being associated with the scandal that was brewing. The custom cake maker backed out. The photographer found a scheduling conflict. The band suddenly had another commitment. I watched it all from a distance, receiving updates from Aunt Rosa and other relatives who didn't know I was the one who'd started the cascade. My sister called me crying. "Everything's falling apart," she sobbed. "Why is this happening? What did we do to deserve this?" I almost laughed. What did we do? Like she was the victim in this story. Like spending $500,000 on a party while your sister died was something that just happened, beyond anyone's control. Alex Torres, the journalist, published his story on a Wednesday morning. He'd been working on it for weeks, carefully verifying every detail, speaking with sources, building an airtight case. The headline read, "Local family funds luxury wedding with allegedly misallocated business funds." He never used our names directly, but the description was unmistakable to anyone who knew us. A prominent local family, a $500,000 wedding, a daughter dying while resources went elsewhere. Questions about charity fund misuse and potential tax evasion. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Extended family members wanting to know if it was true. Friends asking if I was okay. Former classmates reaching out with sympathy and shock. I didn't respond to any of them. I just sat in my apartment, drinking tea, watching the truth spread across the internet like wildfire. My mother called me screaming. "How could you do this? How could you destroy your own family?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. You've ruined your sister's wedding, you've destroyed your father's business, everything we worked for. Everything you stole, you mean? We gave you everything. You gave me nothing," I said, my voice finally rising. "Nothing except the knowledge that I wasn't worth saving, that your reputation mattered more than my life." I hung up on her for the second time in my life. And this time, I blocked her number immediately. The dominoes fell faster than even Victoria had predicted. The groom's family pulled out of the wedding entirely, releasing a carefully worded statement about unforeseen circumstances and financial incompatibility. Without them, the wedding couldn't happen. More than that, without them, Lucia's entire future disappeared. She'd been planning to merge her life with a wealthy, established family. Now she was just a bride without a wedding, a daughter of parents facing federal investigation. My father's business partner, a man named Santiago who'd apparently known nothing about the financial irregularities, filed an emergency motion to freeze certain accounts and take over financial management of the company. He was trying to protect the business from the legal fallout, which meant publicly distancing himself from my father. The local news picked up the story, then the regional news. My parents' faces appeared on television, identified as subjects of an ongoing investigation into charity fund misuse and potential financial crimes. The family empire, built on connections and reputation and careful image management, cracked open like an egg. I watched it all from my small apartment, eating soup that a friend from the hospital support group had brought me. Real chicken soup, made with love by someone who barely knew me, but cared that I was struggling. That night, Lucia showed up at my door. She looked broken, her eyes swollen from crying, her designer clothes wrinkled and stained. "You did this," she said. Not a question, an accusation. "I survived this," I corrected. "There's a difference." She collapsed on my doorstep, sobbing, and despite everything, I let her in. I scheduled my surgery using the money I'd scraped together over months of temp work, the grants I'd applied for through the hospital's social worker, and the community fundraising that friends from my support group had organized without me knowing. The total amount, $25,000, raised in small increments by people who understood that every life had value, not because of family connections or social standing, but because living mattered. The morning of the surgery, I woke up terrified. Not of the procedure itself, but of hopping, of believing I might actually have a future, of trusting that I could survive this. My friends met me at the hospital, not my family, but the real family I'd built over the past months. Hannah from the temp agency, Xavier the accountant, Victoria the lawyer, Alex the journalist, even Hugo from the bank who'd driven an hour to be there. They waited while I went under anesthesia, and they were there when I woke up hours later, groggy and sore but alive. "The surgery went well," the doctor told me, smiling. "We got everything. You're going to need follow-up treatments, but the prognosis is excellent." Excellent, not dramatic, not overshadowed, not less important than a party, just excellent. I cried, and my friends held my hands, and for the first time in my life, I understood what family actually meant. Not blood. Not obligation. Not who raised you or who shares your last name. Family was who showed up, who stayed, who held your hand while you cried and told you that you mattered. 6 months later, I sat at a small dining table in my tiny apartment, eating dinner with the people who had stood by me. Hannah brought homemade lasagna. Xavier contributed a salad. Victoria showed up with wine and stories about her latest case. We laughed about small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that only matter when you're alive to experience them. My parents were facing audits, potential criminal charges, and the complete collapse of their social standing. The investigation had uncovered years of financial manipulation, not just for the wedding, but embedded throughout their business practices. My father's company was being restructured under new management. Their house, the one on the hill above the hospital, was in foreclosure. My sister was rebuilding her life without the pedestal she'd lived on her entire existence. She'd gotten a real job where she had to show up and work like everyone else. We talked sometimes, carefully, both of us learning how to be sisters without the toxic dynamics our parents had created. "Do you feel guilty?" Hannah asked me that night, refilling my wine glass. I thought about it honestly. No, I feel sad sometimes, but guilt, that belongs to them, not me. "You gave them so many chances," Xavier said. "You asked for help, you begged, they chose." "They chose," I agreed. "And I chose too. I chose to survive, to stop waiting for people who were never going to save me, to save myself instead." Victoria raised her glass. "To Myria, who taught us all what real strength looks like." We toasted, and I felt something I'd never experienced in my parents' mansion or at their expensive dinners. I felt home. Later, after everyone left, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my parents were dealing with the consequences of their choices. Learning that reputation couldn't be bought, that image couldn't survive truth, that the appearance of generosity meant nothing when your own daughter was dying and you chose a party instead. I thought about that moment on the hospital floor, holding that bill, seeing my sister's cake on my father's phone. How small I'd felt, how worthless, how desperate. Now I knew better. My worth had never been determined by their choices. It had always been mine to claim. I pulled up my phone and looked at the calendar. Tomorrow I had a follow-up appointment with my oncologist. Next week, I was starting a new job at a nonprofit that helped families navigate medical debt. In 2 months, I was moving into a better apartment with a real kitchen and windows that faced east. I was building a life, not the life my parents had wanted for me, not the life my sister had been given. My life, earned through survival and dignity and the absolute refusal to let their cruelty define my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, the first communication I'd received from her in 3 months. "Your father and I would like to talk, to apologize properly, to try to make things right." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, the part that still remembered being a child who just wanted her parents to love her, wanted to respond immediately, to forgive, to try again. But I'd learned something important over the past year. Forgiveness wasn't something you owed people just because they asked for it, and some betrayals were too deep to heal with words. I typed back, "I need more time, maybe someday, but not now." Then I set my phone down and returned to the window. The city lights sparkled like promises, like possibilities, like the future I'd fought so hard to have. I was 28 years old. I was alive, I was free. And that was enough. The revenge I'd planned hadn't been the explosive, dramatic confrontation people wrote about in stories. It had been quieter than that, more permanent. I'd simply refused to protect them from the truth of what they'd done. I'd let their choices become visible, let the consequences they'd always avoided finally arrive. They'd lost their reputation, their business stability, their perfect family image. My sister had lost her fairy tale wedding and had to learn what work actually meant. And me, I'd lost the fantasy that they'd ever truly loved me, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that I could save myself, that I was worth saving. That survival itself could be the sharpest form of justice. I thought about the hospital bill I still kept, folded in a drawer with all the other evidence. $25,000 that had seemed impossible to raise on my own. The amount they'd spent on flowers alone. But I'd raised it, not from them, but from people who barely knew me, from strangers who believed that life mattered more than appearances, from a community that formed around me when my family fell away. That was the real victory. Not that they fell, but that I rose. Not that they suffered consequences, but that I survived despite them. I pulled out my journal, the one my therapist had suggested I keep, and wrote, "Today I lived. Tomorrow I'll live again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Every breath is proof that they were wrong about me. Every sunrise is my revenge. Every moment of joy, every friendship, every small victory, all of it is evidence that I was always worth saving. I just had to learn to save myself." I closed the journal and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new appointments, new steps forward. But tonight, I was simply alive. And in the quiet darkness of my small apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built from nothing, I finally felt at peace. My name is Myria Solano, and this is the story of how I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's survival. It's thriving. It's building a life so honest and so real that it shows everyone else what they could have had if they'd chosen love over image. They chose the wedding. I chose life. And in the end, I won.